"You'll never own a home, Zachary," my mother announced loudly at our family Christmas dinner, her voice carrying across the entire table so every relative could hear. "You're too weak, too broke, and frankly, too dependent on us to ever make it on your own." My father nodded in agreement, cutting his prime rib with theatrical precision. "Some people are just born to rent, son. Nothing wrong with accepting your limitations." 23 relatives sat around that table, and every single one of them was staring at me with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. My own parents had just publicly declared me a failure at 28 years old. But what they didn't know was that underneath that table, I was recording every word on my phone. And in exactly 6 months, that recording would destroy their lives in front of 200 of their peers at the most prestigious event of the year. You won't believe how this devastating family betrayal turned into the most satisfying revenge I've ever executed. But before I tell you how I completely annihilated my toxic parents' entire world, smash that subscribe button, because family karma stories like this don't come around often. Now, let me take you back 18 months earlier when I still believed my parents loved me. What I'm about to tell you will show you exactly how two people can systematically destroy their own child while building an empire of lies. But first, you need to understand how they almost convinced me I was worthless. My name is Zachary, and for 28 years, I thought I had loving, supportive parents. Mitchell and Patricia Hendricks were absolute pillars of our community in Millbrook, a picture-perfect mid-sized town where everyone knew everyone's business. My father owned Hendricks & Associates, the most successful accounting firm in town, handling finances for half the local businesses. My mother ran Heritage Realty, which controlled about 60% of the local real estate market and had been family business of the year 3 times running. They lived in a stunning 4,800 square foot colonial on Elmwood Drive, the kind of house that made people slow down when they drove past just to stare. Every December, the local magazine featured their Christmas decorations on the cover. They drove matching BMW SUVs, took luxury vacations to Europe twice a year, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone how blessed they were. But here's what made their manipulation so insidious. They've been grooming my dependence since childhood. In high school, when I got a part-time job at the local bookstore, my mother convinced me to quit because it was interfering with my studies. When I wanted to go to a state university 2 hours away, they insisted I stay local and live at home to save money and focus on family. "Why would you want to leave when you have everything you need right here?" my father would say, his arm around my shoulder like a loving dad. "Family is everything, Zachary." I thought they were being protective. I had no idea they were building a cage. I worked 2 jobs through college, tutoring math and working weekends at a local restaurant to minimize student loans. I graduated magna cum laude with a degree in finance and landed a solid position at Riverside Investment Group, a respected firm about 30 minutes from home. At $62,000 a year, I wasn't making Mitchell-level money yet, but I was building something. I was proud of what I'd accomplished. Every month, I dutifully attended family dinners where they would ask about my progress toward homeownership. It became a ritual, almost like a performance they enjoyed. "How's the house hunting going?" my mother would ask with what seemed like genuine maternal interest, leaning forward across the dinner table. When I told them I was saving for a down payment, they'd exchange those looks, the kind married couples develop after 30 years together. Quick glances that said they were communicating something I wasn't part of. "Well, the market is very competitive these days," my father would say, adjusting his glasses in that professorial way. "Interest rates are tricky. Property taxes are rising faster than wages. You really need to think carefully about timing. And location is everything," my mother would add, her voice full of expertise. "You don't want to rush into something in the wrong neighborhood. Property values can be so unpredictable, especially for first-time buyers who don't understand market dynamics." Their advice sounded so wise, so experienced, but every word was designed to keep me trapped. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you couldn't see they were working against you? Drop a comment if you've experienced this kind of manipulation, because what I'm about to tell you will make your blood boil. The comments became more frequent and more specific as my savings grew. When I mentioned looking at a particular neighborhood, My mother would suddenly have horror stories about crime rates or foundation problems. When I found a house I loved, my father would run financial projections that somehow always showed I couldn't afford it. Son, I'm just trying to protect you from making a mistake that could haunt you for decades. He'd say with that concerned father expression I'd trusted my entire life. Real estate is the biggest purchase most people ever make. One wrong move, and you could be financially ruined. But last spring, when I finally had $15,000 saved enough for a solid down payment on a modest starter home, something strange started happening. That's when their protection turned into something much darker. Every house I put an offer on got bought by cash buyers who offered significantly above asking price. Not just one or two houses, every single one. 7 houses in 4 months, all lost to mysterious buyers who materialized out of nowhere. My realtor, Janet Morrison, was completely baffled. Janet had been selling houses in Millbrook for 15 years and had never seen anything like it. It's like someone with inside information is beating you to every property, she said during one of our increasingly frustrating meetings. These buyers are coming in with offers that are 10, 15, sometimes 20,000 over asking price. All cash, no inspections, closing in 2 weeks. Who are these buyers? I asked, feeling more defeated with each conversation. That's the weird part, Janet said, shuffling through paperwork with obvious confusion. Different names every time, but they all have the same characteristics. Cash offers, quick closings, and here's what's really strange. They never seem to actually move into the properties. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I drive by these houses sometimes, just out of curiosity. Within a month of closing, most of them have 4 rent signs in the yards, all with Heritage Realty. Heritage Realty, my mother's company. That should have been my first clue, but I was still too trusting to see the truth. I started paying closer attention to the houses I'd lost. Janet was right. 7 properties, 7 rental signs, all with my mother's company logo. But even then, I didn't connect the dots. I trusted my family too much to imagine they could be working against me. I convinced myself it was just coincidence, just bad luck in a competitive market. The systematic humiliation started slowly, like a drip that eventually becomes a flood. At first, it was just casual mentions at family gatherings. Poor Zachary just can't seem to close on anything, my mother would say with fake sympathy to whoever would listen. I keep telling him he might be reaching too high for his income level. Then it escalated to dinner parties with their friends. They started using my housing struggles as entertainment, painting me as a cautionary tale about young people who don't understand money. Kids these days expect everything handed to them, my father would say, shaking his head sadly while cutting into his expensive steak. They don't understand that home ownership is a privilege you have to earn through years of discipline and sacrifice. Zachary keeps putting in offers on houses that are completely out of his league, my mother would add, her voice carrying that perfect tone of long-suffering patience. We've tried to guide him towards something more realistic, but he won't listen to experience. But the real betrayal was still coming. And when I discovered it, everything I thought I knew about my family would shatter. The worst part was how they framed their concern. They weren't just criticizing me. They were positioning themselves as wise, long-suffering parents trying to help a financially irresponsible son who refused to listen to reason. The breaking point came during a family barbecue last August. My cousin Warren had just bought his first house, a beautiful 2-story in the Riverside district that he'd gotten for an incredibly good price. How did you manage to get such a great deal? I asked Warren privately, genuinely curious about his success. Honestly, it was weird, he said, lowering his voice and looking around to make sure no one was listening. I put in an offer, and the next day the seller's agent called and said they wanted to accept immediately. No negotiation, no other offers to compete with. It was like someone had cleared the path for me. Something cold settled in my stomach. Who was the seller's agent? Heritage Realty. Patricia Hendricks. Your mom, actually. She said she wanted to help family get a good start in life. My mother had helped my cousin buy a house while systematically preventing me from buying one. That night, I confronted her directly. Her response revealed everything I needed to know about who she really was. That evening, I stayed after the barbecue ended and approached my mother while she was cleaning up in the kitchen. Mom, Warren told me you helped him get his house. I've been trying to buy something for months. Why haven't you offered to help me? She didn't even look up from the dishes she was washing, her movements calm and deliberate. Warren was realistic about his price range. Honey, he looked at houses he could actually afford. I can afford houses in that same price range. Can you, though? She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something in her expression that wasn't motherly concern. It was condescension, pure and simple. Zachary, you make $62,000 a year. After taxes, loan payments, and living expenses, you barely have enough left over for a decent down payment. I have $15,000 saved. My mother sighed like I was a child asking for something impossible. $15,000 isn't enough for the kind of house you keep looking at. You need to be more realistic about your price range. What if I looked at smaller houses? Starter homes. Honey, even starter homes in good neighborhoods are beyond your reach. Maybe you should focus on finding a nice apartment. Something modest that fits your actual budget. I left that conversation feeling crushed. But within 24 hours, I would discover something that would change everything. The conversation with my mother left me feeling deflated and confused. Was I really being unrealistic? Was I actually bad with money? For weeks, I second-guessed everything, wondering if my parents were right about my limitations. But then something happened that changed everything. I was having lunch with my friend Connor Mills, who teaches at the local high school. Connor had been house hunting around the same time I was, with a similar budget and similar struggles. I finally figured out what was happening with my house offers, Connor said, stabbing his salad with obvious frustration. Every time I put in an offer, someone else would come in with a better one within 24 hours. Always cash, always above asking price. Same thing happened to me. I said, Janet thinks someone has inside information. That's exactly what it is. My realtor did some digging and found out that most of the cash buyers were connected to the same investment group. They're buying up starter homes, then renting them out at premium prices. My heart started pounding. Which investment group? Millbrook Property Holdings. Ever heard of them? I hadn't, but something about the name made my skin crawl. Where are they based? That's the weird part. The business address is the same as some local accounting firm. Hendricks & Associates, I think. In that moment, everything clicked into place. But what I discovered next would prove my parents weren't just sabotaging me. They were stealing from me. That evening, I went online and researched Millbrook Property Holdings. The company was registered as an LLC, which made ownership information harder to track, but I found their business registration documents. Mitchell and Patricia Hendricks, joint owners. My parents had created a shell company to compete against me for houses. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the county clerk's office. My hands were shaking as I requested public records from Millbrook Property Holdings, Heritage Realty, and Hendricks & Associates. What I found made me physically ill. Millbrook Property Holdings was owned jointly by my parents. They had created this company to buy houses, then rent them through my mother's real estate agency while using my father's accounting firm to manage the finances. But that wasn't the worst part. I requested copies of all property transactions involving Millbrook Property Holdings over the past year. There were 23 properties, and I recognized 8 of the addresses immediately. They were houses I tried to buy. My own parents had been using a fake investment company to outbid me on houses. But the documents I found next revealed a betrayal so systematic it took my breath away. My parents weren't just preventing me from buying a home. They were profiting from my failure while building a real estate empire using my financial future as collateral. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the paperwork spread across my kitchen table, trying to understand how parents could do this to their own child. Then I remembered something that had seemed insignificant at the time. 6 months ago, my parents had called me in a panic about urgent paperwork for what they called a business restructuring. My father was supposedly leaving for a business trip to Chicago in 2 hours, and the bank needed signatures before he left, or they'd lose a major tax advantage. Son, we need you to come over right now, my father had said, his voice stressed and urgent. The bank closes in an hour, and if we don't get these signatures notarized today, will lose $15,000 in tax benefits. I'd rushed over during my lunch break, my heart pounding from the emergency tone in his voice. The documents were already laid out on the kitchen table with sticky notes showing where to sign. My mother was pacing nervously, checking her watch every few minutes. "The notary is coming in 10 minutes, she said. "Your father's flight leaves at 4 p.m., and he has to drop these off at the bank first." I trusted them completely. I had no idea I was signing my financial future away. When I'd asked what I was actually signing, my father said it was just updating beneficiary information and adding my name as a backup contact for their business accounts. "Nothing that affects you financially," he assured me, his hand on my shoulder in that fatherly way. "Just bureaucratic requirements from a bank. You know how these institutions love their paperwork." The notary arrived, I signed where they indicated, and my father rushed out the door with the papers. The whole thing took 15 minutes. Now I wondered what I had actually signed. What I discovered about those documents would reveal the most devastating betrayal of all. But first, I needed professional help to understand what I was dealing with. The next day, I took another sick day and hired a forensic accountant named Cooper Walsh. Cooper specialized in white-collar crime and financial fraud. He wasn't cheap. $500 for the initial consultation, but I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I brought him everything I'd gathered: the property records, the LLC documents, copies of the papers I'd signed under pressure. Cooper studied the documents for over an hour, making notes and cross-referencing different papers. Finally, he looked up with an expression I'll never forget. "Mr. Hendricks," Cooper said, his voice grave, "your parents have committed multiple felonies. What they've done to you constitutes financial abuse, identity theft, and systematic fraud." My hands started shaking. "What do you mean? These documents you signed under pressure? You didn't just become a backup contact. You became a guarantor for debts associated with Millbrook Property Holdings. Your credit, your signature, and your financial future have been used as collateral for their investment scheme." But it was worse than just co-signing loans. Much worse. Cooper spread out financial statements across his desk. "They've used your signature to secure loans totaling $267,000. These loans are tied to properties that are underperforming financially. When, not if, these investments fail, you'll be personally liable for every penny." $267,000. I felt like I was drowning. How is this legal? It's not legal. What they've done is systematic financial abuse. They've essentially stolen your financial identity while maintaining the facade of being concerned parents. Cooper showed me bank records that revealed the full scope of their operation. The rental income from the properties wasn't covering the mortgage payments. They were operating at a loss of approximately $4,000 per month across all properties. "It's a pyramid scheme," Cooper explained. "They're covering the deficit by refinancing existing properties and taking out new loans using your credit as security. When a house of cards collapses, the banks will come after the guarantors." That's you. I left Cooper's office knowing my life had been built on a lie. But what I did next would begin their complete destruction. That night, I called my parents and asked to meet for dinner. I needed to hear them explain this directly, to give them one chance to come clean before I destroyed them. We met at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated every birthday and achievement of my childhood. The irony of the location wasn't lost on me. This was where my childhood officially ended. "You seem stressed lately, son," my father said, cutting into his veal with the same precision he used for everything. "Everything okay at work?" I pulled out copies of the Millbrook Property Holdings documents and placed them on the white tablecloth between us, right next to the breadbasket. The change in my parents' demeanor was immediate and chilling. My father's knife stopped moving. My mother's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "Where did you get these?" my mother asked, her voice sharp and completely different from her usual maternal tone. "That's not important. What's important is that I know what you've been doing." My father tried to take control of the conversation, leaning forward with that authoritative expression he used with difficult clients. "Zachary, you don't understand the complexities of business investment. These documents are taken out of context. What context makes it okay to use my credit to buy houses while preventing me from buying a house of my own?" Their response revealed everything I needed to know about who they really were. The silence stretched for almost a full minute. Other diners were enjoying their meals, laughing and talking, completely unaware that a family was disintegrating at table 12. Finally, my mother spoke, and her words revealed everything I needed to know about who she really was. "We were protecting you from making a financial mistake you couldn't recover from," she said, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. "Real estate investment is complicated. You don't have the experience or the knowledge to handle that kind of responsibility. So you decided to handle it for me? Without my knowledge or consent." My father leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking older and more calculating. "We were planning to include you in the profits once the business was established. This was always meant to benefit the family." Even as they were caught red-handed, they were still lying. Cooper had shown me the LLC documents. There was no provision for profit sharing, no plan to include me as anything other than a guarantor for their debts. "What about the houses I tried to buy?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. "Did you prevent me from buying those to protect me, too?" My parents exchanged that look again, the same one I'd seen at family dinners for months. But now I understood what it meant. It was the look of co-conspirators checking to make sure their story was straight. "Those houses weren't right for you," my mother said with practiced ease. "They were overpriced in declining neighborhoods or had structural problems you didn't know how to evaluate. All 8 of them. We have 30 years of experience in these markets, Zachary," my father said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard my entire life. "We were trying to save you from financial disaster." That's when I realized they weren't just lying to me. They convinced themselves their lies were true. I looked at my parents across that table, really looked at them, and saw them clearly for the first time. They weren't protective parents who'd made mistakes. They were predators who had systematically destroyed their own child's future while convincing themselves they were heroes. "I want my name removed from all of these documents," I said quietly. "That's not how it works," my father replied, cutting another piece of veal like we were discussing the weather. "These are binding legal agreements. You can't just walk away from financial obligations. Then we have a problem." My mother reached across the table and put her hand on mine, the same gesture she'd used to comfort me as a child. But now it felt like a snake wrapping around my wrist. "Sweetheart, why don't you let us handle the business side of things? You focus on your job, maybe find a nice apartment in your actual price range. Leave the complicated financial decisions to people who understand them." I pulled my hand away. "I'm not your sweetheart anymore, and I'm not your victim." I walked out of Romano's that night, knowing our relationship was over. But more importantly, I had a plan that would destroy everything they'd built. The next morning, I called Cooper Walsh and told him I wanted to build a case that would send my parents to prison. But I also wanted something more. I wanted them publicly humiliated in front of everyone they'd ever tried to impress. "We'll need more evidence," Cooper said. "What you have is strong, but we need documentation of the systematic nature of their fraud. Pattern evidence that shows this wasn't just poor business decisions." That afternoon, I bought a digital recorder and started documenting every conversation with my parents. I also started following them, learning their routines, watching their business operations. What I discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just running one fraud scheme. They were running 3. And what I uncovered next would shock even the FBI. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I used vacation days to follow my parents, stake out their business meetings, and document their operations. What I discovered was a criminal enterprise that went far beyond just stealing from their son. My mother wasn't just manipulating my house purchases. She was systematically manipulating the entire local housing market. I watched her meet with Harold Kingston, one of the mysterious cash buyers, at a coffee shop downtown. I sat 3 tables away and used my phone to record their conversation. "I'm getting uncomfortable with these transactions, Patricia," Harold was saying, stirring his coffee nervously. "You're asking me to make offers on houses and then immediately transfer them to your investment company. It feels like money laundering." "It's perfectly legal, Harold," my mother replied, her voice smooth and confident. "We're just streamlining the investment process." You're doing us a favor by acting as an intermediary buyer. But why can't Millbrook Property Holdings just make the offers directly? Because some sellers prefer individual buyers over investment companies. It's a marketing psychology thing. People feel better selling to families than to corporations. But Harold's next question changed everything. And why are we always outbidding the same young guy? The realtor mentioned he's tried to buy 3 of these houses. My mother's response made my blood run cold. That young man is my son. He doesn't understand real estate markets and keeps making offers on properties that aren't suitable for him. We're actually protecting him by ensuring he doesn't make a financial mistake he can't recover from. Even to her co-conspirator, she was maintaining the fiction that she was protecting me. Your son. Harold's voice changed, becoming uncomfortable. Patricia, if you're systematically preventing your own child from buying a home while profiting from his failures, that's not protection. That's abuse. There was a long silence. Harold, I need you to focus on the business aspects of our arrangement. Family dynamics aren't relevant to our investment partnership. Actually, they are relevant. If this gets out, if people find out you've been sabotaging your own son's attempts to buy a home, it'll destroy both our reputations. I can't be associated with that kind of publicity. Harold was having second thoughts, and he was about to become my secret weapon. 3 days later, I approached Harold in the parking lot of his office building. I've been watching his routine and knew he always left work at exactly 5:15 p.m. Mr. Kingston, I said, walking up to his car as he unlocked it. I think we need to talk about the houses you've been buying. Harold's face went pale. He looked around the parking lot like he was expecting to be arrested. I think you should speak with your mother about that. I've spoken with my mother. She told me you've been helping her protect me from making bad financial decisions. I'd like to hear your perspective on that. Harold was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn between loyalty to my mother and his own conscience. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from here, he finally said. Not the one where I meet with your mother. Can you be there in 10 minutes? What Harold told me next would give me everything I needed to destroy my parents completely. At the coffee shop, Harold laid out the entire operation. My mother had recruited him and 4 other local businessmen to act as straw buyers for properties that Millbrook Property Holdings wanted to acquire. They would make the initial offers, then immediately transfer the properties to my parents' company for a small fee. She told us it was a tax strategy, Harold explained, his hands shaking as he stirred his coffee. Something about avoiding corporate buyer restrictions and getting better deals from individual sellers. Did she mention that I was trying to buy some of these same properties? Harold's face crumpled. She said you were financially irresponsible, and she was worried you'd end up in foreclosure. She showed U.S. bank statements that made it look like you were living paycheck to paycheck. Bank statements. Your credit report, your employment records, even your rental history. She had detailed financial information about you that made it seem like you couldn't afford the houses you were trying to buy. My mother had been sharing my private financial information with strangers to justify sabotaging my house purchases. But Harold wasn't done. What he told me next revealed the full scope of their criminal operation. There's something else, Harold said, lowering his voice. Your mother has been running this same operation in 3 other towns. She has networks of straw buyers in Riverside, Millfield, and Oakton. Same model. Prevent first-time buyers from purchasing homes, then buy the properties through intermediaries and rent them at premium prices. My parents weren't just running a local fraud scheme. They were operating across multiple markets, systematically preventing young families from building wealth through home ownership while profiting from their exclusion. Harold, I need your help to stop this, I said. What they're doing isn't just hurting me. It's hurting entire communities. Harold was quiet for a long time, processing everything. What do you need me to do? With Harold's cooperation, I now had access to the inner workings of my parents' entire operation. He provided me with documents, recorded phone calls, and detailed accounts of how they had recruited multiple conspirators across different markets. But I needed more than just evidence. I needed a way to expose them publicly that would destroy their reputations forever. The plan came to me while I was reviewing Harold's evidence late one night. In 3 weeks, my parents were scheduled to receive the ethical business leadership award at the annual Chamber of Commerce dinner, the biggest social event of the year in Millbrook. Every influential person in town would be there. Business leaders, politicians, community organizers, and media representatives. My parents would be publicly honored for their commitment to honest dealing and community service. The irony was perfect. I contacted Rebecca Morrison, an attorney who specialized in financial crimes and family law. Rebecca had built a reputation as the most aggressive prosecutor in the region for cases involving financial fraud. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of systematic financial exploitation I've seen, Rebecca said, after reviewing Cooper's forensic accounting report and Harold's evidence. Your parents have committed wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and what we call financial abuse of a family member across multiple jurisdictions. What kind of consequences are we talking about? Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and started writing numbers. Federal prison time, significant prison time, plus civil liability for all damages, which could force them to liquidate everything they own to pay restitution. How significant? Based on the financial harm they've caused you and other victims, plus the systematic nature of the fraud across multiple markets, we're looking at potential restitution of $600,000 to $1 million. That's before punitive damages. My parents' net worth was approximately $1.2 million. A judgment of that size would destroy them completely. But I wanted more than money. I wanted them exposed publicly in front of everyone they'd spent decades trying to impress. We can coordinate with law enforcement to time the arrests for maximum impact, Rebecca said with a smile that would have terrified my parents. If you're willing to wear a wire at the awards dinner, we can gather additional evidence while ensuring their humiliation is complete. The next week was spent in coordination with multiple agencies. The FBI was interested because the fraud crossed state lines. The state attorney general's office wanted to make an example of real estate fraud. Local law enforcement was eager to show they could handle white-collar crime. I also contacted Melissa Torres, an investigative journalist at the regional newspaper who specialized in financial crime stories. If you can prove what you're alleging, Melissa said after reviewing my evidence, this isn't just a family story. This is a systematic scheme that's affected housing markets across 4 counties. This could be front-page material for weeks. Everything was falling into place. In 2 weeks, my parents would walk into their own destruction. Melissa had 2 weeks to investigate independently and prepare a comprehensive expose. She interviewed Harold and the other straw buyers, examined public records across multiple counties, and spoke with other families who had been affected by my parents' market manipulation. What she found was even worse than I'd realized. My parents had systematically prevented over 40 families from purchasing homes across 4 different markets while profiting from their failures. The financial impact was estimated at over $2 million in stolen opportunity and inflated rental costs. But the masterstroke was coordinating with the other victims. Melissa helped me contact families in Riverside, Millfield, and Oakton who had experienced the same mysterious cash buyers and sudden price increases. I tried to buy 6 different houses last year, said Amanda Fletcher, a nurse from Riverside. Every single one got bought by someone who paid cash and never moved in. Half of them are rental properties now with Heritage Realty signs. Same here, added Connor Mills from Millfield. It's like someone was systematically keeping first-time buyers out of the market while driving up rental prices. We coordinated their attendance at the Chamber of Commerce dinner. They would be my secret weapons, living proof that my parents' crimes extended far beyond just their son. The night of the awards dinner, my parents arrived expecting to be celebrated as community leaders. They had no idea they were walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. The night of the Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner, my parents arrived at the Millbrook Grand Ballroom looking like the successful power couple they'd always presented themselves to be. My father wore a new tuxedo he'd bought specifically for the occasion, and my mother had spent the afternoon at the most expensive salon in town. They worked the cocktail hour like the social climbers they were, accepting congratulations and talking about their successful family business with anyone who would listen. I arrived early and took a table near the back with Harold and 3 other families who had been victims of their scheme. The wire I was wearing was virtually undetectable, a small device provided by FBI agent Patricia Chun that would record everything for federal prosecutors. The ballroom was decorated elegantly for the occasion, filled with the cream of local society. Everyone who mattered in Millbrook was there, ready to celebrate another year of ethical business leadership. My parents were seated at the head table with other award recipients, clearly enjoying their moment in the spotlight. During dinner, I watched them laugh and charm their table mates, completely unaware that their entire world was about to collapse. At exactly 8:47 p.m., their perfect evening would become their worst nightmare. The awards presentation began around 8:30 p.m. My parents were the third award of the evening, receiving recognition for outstanding ethical business practices and community leadership. Chamber President Arnold Fitzgerald read their accomplishments. Mitchell and Patricia Hendricks have built successful businesses while maintaining the highest standards of integrity. Their commitment to honest dealing and community service makes them exemplary leaders in our business community. My father stepped to the microphone, beaming with pride. "Thank you so much for this incredible honor," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Patricia and I have always believed that business success means nothing if it's not built on a foundation of integrity and family values. The audience applauded warmly. Several people were nodding in agreement. We've tried to build businesses that we can be proud of, that serve our community, and that we can pass on to the next generation with confidence. Most importantly, he continued, we've tried to model for our son Zachary the importance of hard work, financial responsibility, and ethical business practices. That's when Melissa Torres stood up. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. "Excuse me," Melissa said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom as she stood at her table near the front. "I'm Melissa Torres from the Regional Herald. Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks, I have some questions about those ethical business practices." The room went completely silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming, the clink of someone setting down their wine glass. "I'm sorry," my mother said, trying to maintain her composure while clearly rattled, "but this isn't the appropriate venue for interviews." "Actually, it's the perfect venue," Melissa replied, pulling out a thick folder of documents. "You're receiving an award for ethical business practices, but I have evidence that you've been systematically defrauding housing markets across 4 counties for over 2 years." The audience was frozen, unsure whether this was part of the program or a genuine confrontation. "That's absolutely ridiculous," my father said, but his voice was shaking. "We run legitimate businesses with the highest standards of integrity." "Then how do you explain these documents showing that you've been using networks of straw buyers to manipulate property sales across multiple markets?" Melissa held up papers that were clearly visible to the audience. "Were these recordings where you admit to sabotaging your own son's attempts to purchase a home?" The word recording sent visible shock through my parents. "But I was just getting started." That's when Harold Kingston stood up from his table across the room. "Patricia," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the silent ballroom, "you told me those property purchases were legitimate investments. You never mentioned you were using me to hurt your own son." The murmur that went through the room was like a wave. People were starting to piece together what was happening. "Harold, please," my mother said, her composure finally cracking. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion." "When is the time?" Harold shot back, his own anger finally surfacing. "When is the right time to admit that you've been running a fraud scheme that prevents families from buying homes while you profit from their failures?" Amanda Fletcher stood up from another table. "I drove here from Riverside because your fraud scheme cost my family our dream home and forced us to pay inflated rent for 2 years." Connor Mills stood up next. "Millfield, same story. You destroyed our housing market." One by one, victims from across 4 counties stood up around the room, all with the same story of mysterious cash buyers and shattered dreams. That's when I stood up. The entire ballroom turned to look at me. "The right time," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "was before you cost me $67,000 in failed home purchases and signed my name to $267,000 in debt I never agreed to take on." The room erupted. People were turning in their seats, trying to follow the conversation. The elegant awards dinner had turned into a public trial. "Zachary," my father said desperately, stepping away from the microphone, "you don't understand the complexities of business investment dash. Understand fraud." I interrupted, walking toward the front of the room. "I understand that you've been preventing me from buying a home, so I couldn't build assets that would be protected from the debt you illegally put in my name." I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings I'd made, my mother's voice clearly admitting to making calls to ensure sellers chose other buyers over me. The sound of her own voice coming through the ballroom speaker system was devastating. But the best part was still coming. Rebecca Morrison stood up from her table near the back of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rebecca announced, pulling out her badge, "I'm Rebecca Morrison, federal prosecutor. Earlier today, criminal complaints were filed against both Mitchell and Patricia Hendricks for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and systematic financial abuse across multiple states." The color drained completely from my father's face. My mother looked like she might collapse. Agent Chun moved toward the front of the room with two other federal agents who had been positioned near the exits. But the real humiliation was just beginning. Arnold Fitzgerald stepped to the microphone with a look of absolute horror. "Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these revelations, the Chamber will be conducting a full review of tonight's awards and implementing new vetting procedures." Around the room, I could see my parents' friends and business associates literally turning their backs. Margaret Walsh from the country club grabbed her purse and walked out without looking in their direction. The mayor's wife was whispering frantically to her husband while shooting disgusted looks at the head table. Dr. Harrison Mitchell, my father's golf partner for 15 years, stood up and announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I had no idea we were dining with criminals. Patricia, you helped my daughter look for houses last year. How many legitimate buyers did you sabotage?" Micro dash, but I wasn't done. I had one final revelation that would complete their destruction. I walked to the front of the room and took the microphone. "You told this entire community that I was too weak, too broke, and too dependent to ever own a home," I said, looking directly at both my parents. "You said some people are just born to rent." I paused, letting the audience remember their cruel words from months of dinner parties and social gatherings. "What you didn't tell them was that you had been systematically sabotaging my attempts to buy a home while using my credit to secure loans for properties you never intended to pay for." I pulled out a legal document and held it up for everyone to see. "This is a purchase agreement for 847 Riverside Drive. The 5-bedroom colonial with a circular driveway that you've been trying to buy for 3 years but couldn't quite afford." My father's eyes widened in recognition. It was his dream house, the property he'd been coveting since it went on the market. "The seller accepted my offer this afternoon. All cash, no contingencies, closing next week." The audience was riveted. "You said I'd never own a home," I continued, smiling at them with genuine warmth for the first time in years. "As of next Friday, I'll own the house you've been dreaming about for 3 years, while you'll be in federal custody awaiting trial." Justice was served, and karma had the final word. 6 months later, my parents' trials made front-page news across 3 states. My father was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. My mother got 4 years plus 7 years probation. Both lost their professional licenses permanently. The social destruction was complete. Their former friends crossed the street to avoid them before they went to prison. The country club revoked their membership, and every business association expelled them. Most satisfying of all, Harold Kingston bought their dream house on Elmwood Drive at auction and converted it into affordable housing for first-time buyers. Meanwhile, I'm thriving in the house they coveted, and I've started a nonprofit helping young families navigate homeownership while avoiding financial fraud. My parents said I'd never own a home. Now I own the house of their dreams while they've lost everything. If you enjoyed seeing toxic parents get exactly what they deserved, you'll love my next story about the stepmother who tried to steal my inheritance and ended up losing her own house when I exposed her forgery scheme. What's the worst family betrayal you've ever experienced? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more karma stories that prove justice always wins in the end.
If this story got you thinking, go ahead and hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that hit deep, and tap the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. And hey, if you know someone who needs to hear this one, share it with them. Thanks for watching.